Welcome back to the TimCo Retail Manager course. This course focuses on real-world application development. In this video, we'll be updating the app settings for our WPF project so when it's published, it has production information in it. We'll also be removing a file from Git that we accidentally published. Now, for those of you who are subscribers to Patreon at the $5 per month level or higher, head over to get the source code for today's video. Now, if you're new to this project, welcome. If you're just interested in the topic this video covers, I think you'll get a great introduction in a real-world setting. And if you're interested in starting this project from the beginning with us, there's a whole playlist for this, as well as I did publish phase 1 of this on my site as, with no ads, with the source code and all the rest, if you want to get a jump start on that. Phase 2 is coming soon. We always do the YouTube stuff first, and then it kind of lags behind. I'll do another phase of what we have on YouTube on my site if you want the source code on the videos with no ads and that kind of stuff. But the YouTube playlist always has the most current information. Either way, I appreciate if you give this video a like. Doing so helps spread the word and ensure more people will be helped by this video. All right, let's start in the browser. So what we have right now is we have this site. And in fact, let's go over and start the API, make sure it's warmed up. I did hit it a little earlier. And the API comes right up. So make sure the API is warmed up will help us not have that lag time. Because the first time you start at the website, it'll be a little slow. Because I'm using the free plan and it turns off the API if it's not being used for a while. Back here on the DevOps site, we have these pipelines, both our pipeline and our releases. Our pipeline is kind of the build process, the CI or continuous integration. And then we have our release process. And that's really what we want to see changed is what we're releasing. But in actuality, we're going to have to back this up all the way to our build process because of the fact that that's when we have those app setting files available. We make some changes there. So let's first start by opening up our pipeline and looking at our last build. What I want to do is under artifacts, there's going to be this WPF drop. And inside here, we have our executable and our PDB file. Let's download our executable. And once this downloads, I will open it up in Windows Explorer. Okay, so that's downloaded. Let's open up Windows Explorer. We have TRM Desktop UI. Now, first of all, if you right-click on the file and go to Properties, you'll notice it says this file came from another computer and might be blocked to help protect this computer. You can unblock this and hit Apply. This is because this file is not signed with a developer certificate. If you were going to do this for a production application, you'd want to sign this with a developer certificate. Now, that's not cheap. Usually it's around $100 US, maybe more, to get a developer certificate. Now, if you're working for a company, no big deal. If you're working inside of a company, you can self-sign it as long as you trust that certificate authority throughout your company. But for us, we're not going to sign it. We're not going to worry about this. This is a demo application. If we were going to make money off of this, then it would make sense to invest something in it. But I wouldn't invest in it until I'm going to know I'm going to get that money back. So now that I have this unblocked, if we try and open this, I'm not going to do this right now. But if we try to open this, it won't open. In fact, if we double click on it, nothing seems to happen. But, and I did this before, so I want to show you what the results are. If you go to your event viewer, this is the Windows event viewer. Notice it has kind of an overview of what's going on, lots of stuff going on my computer. We go to Windows logs here on the left and expand this out in application events. Inside of here, we'll see that we have a couple of red exclamation points that refer to, let's zoom in here, TRM Desktop UI.exe. And it failed. And I had in the temp folder at that time. I've now moved over to the demo folder, but it's the same principle that applies. So the previous error here, .NET runtime, This is an actual full exception message because it was an unhandled exception. Now, that's a bug we need to fix. We need to have handled exceptions and show the user, hey, something went wrong. We don't have that in place yet. That'll probably be maybe next time's video. But in any event, we have this unhandled exception, and that gets logged to the event log. Now, how did that happen? Well, this is something built into Windows. When you have unhandled exceptions, they go into the event viewer. Now, you can create a logging system that actually logs handled exceptions into the event viewer if you want. But in our case, since it's unhandled, it went there by default. All right, so this message says invocation of the constructor on type bootstrapper that matches the specified binding constraints through an exception. Line number 9, position number 22. This is also why we want to have handled exceptions, because this is too much information to give to the user. But it says the configuration file appsettings.json was not found and is not optional. The physical path is ctemp appsettings.json. Well, since we're doing a single file deploy, what happened is it packaged up that appsettings.json file inside of our exe file. Well, that's a problem because we need to have that file externally since it's looking for it in the same directory as the executable. So we need to solve this problem first. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to drag this off the screen real quick, and we're going to open up Visual Studio. This is our project. Let's right-click on TRM Desktop UI and go to Open Folder in File Explorer. Here we go. And I'm going to grab all 3 of these setting files. I'm going to copy these. I'll close this out. And I'm going to paste them right here in my C demos. Because it said that it was missing the appsettings.json file. So now I have all 3 of those files like we would have in a real application if we really deploy this. Now, we might not have all 3. We might just want the appsettings.json file. But if we run this, let's change the values here so that it has the right API, not the local host, which if we look here, this is going to say localhost 5001. That's not what we want for our application. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go over to our API. We're going to grab this URL. You can actually come over here in your dashboard. There's this little copy to clipboard. That's really helpful. Let's just copy that to clipboard. And what we're going to do is in production.json. We're not going to do it in the base. We're not going to do it in this one, which is just app settings. We're going to do it in production. We want to make sure that override is working. So we're going to say API, and then the actual URL to our production, or we're calling it production, but it's really just our shared development API. Gonna hit save. Let's, we don't even have to close this down. Let's run our executable file. When we do, it pops up. We're gonna put the correct password in because it is different. Oh, I almost forgot it. It is different than our local development password. We hit login. And what we do, we're going to get a no connection can be made because the target machine actively refused it message. We know our API is working. So why are we getting this message? This is where debugging skills are important. And I wanted to show you this because I wanted to show you kind of the place where we're at right now, and maybe if you try it yourself, the messages or issues you'd get. Because it's important to see all these problems, because these are the problems you're going to see in production. So let's close this out, and let's figure out why that might be. I'm going to show you something. If we go to development.json, add this, and let's just copy this line and put it in development.json. And in order to make it a good debugging experiment, I want to take it out of here now. I don't want to have it in this spot too. Now it's just in one spot, but it's in development.json, not production.json. Let's run this again. We'll change the password. And it logs in. And if we go to users, user management, you can see there's a bunch of different accounts here because we've created a few and some other people have as well, looks like. And I have all the rights for all 3 roles. So why is it that it changed if I was in development but not production? Well, I want to show this off before we got started because we have an issue with this executable file. And I didn't want to waste too much time debugging it on screen. I want to show you kind of more the end of the debugging process. But if we go back to our run process or our build process, we go back to pipelines, select our continuous integration and hit edit. We come down here to our build WPF project. We put all these command line arguments here for our .NET publish command. But if you look in the documentation, there's one we missed. And that is -C. You put a space and say release. Let's kind of zoom in here a little bit if we can. It's a little better. So there's the release build, meaning we're not building, by default we build for debug. We don't want to build our production exe, just want to be a debug version. We want a release version of that file. So we want to make sure we make that change. So we're going to save this change, but not queue it. So now we're building for release for this build of WPF project. But we're not quite done yet because we also have to make a change in our code. Because remember, these JSON files were not being included in the outside of the exe file. And since they weren't outside the exe file could not find them. Now, there is for right now with Windows or .NET Core 3.0, 3.1, there is a way you can find these files, because what happens is when we run this, and I already deleted it, but when we run the exe file, what happens is it actually extracts all the information, kind of like a zip file, extracts it to an unknown or unpublished location, and then it runs the executable from there, meaning our Appsettings file is extracted. However, in .NET 5, yes, you heard me right, .NET 5, which comes out later this month, in .NET 5, that's going to change. So I don't want to create something that depends on looking at that extracted file when that file won't be extracted later. So we have to mark this file as extractable or as not included in the single file exe. Remember back in our publish, we say publish single file. So what we're going to do is if you go to desktop UI project and we edit this project, edit project file, we see we have 3 entries here for our different JSON files. And let's just, for right now, let's just do appsettings.json. And we're going to add one line here. And that one file is exclude from, it's not in the IntelliSense list yet, from single file, and mark that as true. So exclude from single file. It's not in IntelliSense yet, but that means you have to type it exactly correct and not misspell anything. But if you say this and say true, what's going to happen is when we build a single file, so just our single exe, we're not going to include appsettings.json. So right now we're getting our exe file and our PDB file. Now with this one extra entry. When we do our build, we'll have our exe file, our pdb file, and our appsettings.json file. So we'll have 3 files. Now, I do want to modify my appsettings.json file directly. I had talked about having this production version, and there is still a case for this. But since I'm deploying to a customer's desktop, a user's desktop or a user's app machine, I don't want to have files that look like, oh, this is the production one versus this is the development one. So I don't necessarily want to have appsettings.json and appsettings.production.json. So I'm just going to publish our appsettings.json and that's it. Now this does mean that we have to do some work in this file because I don't want this to always be localhost. I want that to be a development setting. In fact, let's do this. Let's copy this over to development. That's probably the best first step we can do because now it doesn't matter what our main setting is. In fact, let's just change this to be test, which would totally crash if it tried to access test. Let's start this and see if we can't get our application to run. This is locally. Log in. It's talking to the API. There we go. That's local. That's using localhost. It's not using the API that's been published out to Azure. So even though our main file says test, which would not work, because let's close these out, because our development file says localhost, we're good to go. So now you can put anything you want in here, including leaving it empty. We're not going to leave it empty, but we could, because now it will run locally, no problem, good to go. So now let's go back over to our DevOps site. And we have this C release added now, but I want to do one more thing before we do a build. So let's hit add one to the agent job. And what this allows us to do is add a task in this list. We've done this before, but this time we're going to add a task that's not from Microsoft. Under search, we're going to look for replace. We get this replace tokens in file. And this person has created an application plugin, you could say, for Azure DevOps. If we learn more information, we can go to the site and find out what this does. And what this does, if we look down here, it's currently on version 3.6, I believe. Yes, 3.6.0. And what this does is it replaces tokens. So it looks for, you can target any file you want in your source code, which means, in theory, you could even target your actual C# code and have tokens in it. Now, we're not going to hard code things in our C# code, most likely. But there is a case for saying, hey, maybe the JSON file changes where its location is based upon build for production. Well, you could change the C# code to say, hey, it's over here now versus it's over there now. That's possible. I'd recommend against it. I'd recommend finding a different way of doing that. But in our case, what we're going to do is look for the JSON file, any JSON file, and we're going to do a replace on all the tokens there. And what is a token? Well, a token starts with, let's zoom in here if we can. A token by default starts with the # or the hashtag and then the open curly brace. And it ends with the closed curly brace and that hashtag or # again. What that allows us to do is say, here's a variable that we're storing in Azure DevOps. Replace this value with that variable. There's an example down here, I believe. We might need to scroll out just a little bit, or zoom out. If we look down here, there's a lot of good information in here. Maybe I went too far. It's hard to see when it's zoomed out like this. But what we'll do is it will replace values in the file. I'll just show you. That'll be easier. It's in there somewhere. Sorry. Great documentation. I read through it. I've used it a few times before in the past. Really, really helpful. I really appreciate this person's work on this. So let's just add this. And notice it adds it down here below the WPF project. That's not where we want it, the build WPF project. So let's drag that up. If you mouse over these dots on the right-hand side, it gives a different arrow key or arrow indicator. You can click and drag to drag them up and reorder them. So now it says, hey, replace tokens in the config file. Let's say replace tokens in the JSON file. This is just a name. That's all it is. But that way we know what's happening here. Root directory we can leave empty. And we're saying any JSON file. And again, this is all covered in the documentation, but any directory, any JSON file. So if we have appsettings.json, if we had test.json, it will do the replacement on that. So it's going to look for any JSON file and it's going to do a replacement. And if we look down here, let's do it under advanced. The token prefix and suffix are by default that pound sign and open and close curly braces. We're going to use those. Now, where does this token come from? Well, it comes from our variables here. So once this is set up, that's all we had to do was change the name if we want to change the name, and then change the target file to JSON file. So what will happen is it's going to find the file, replace the values, and then it's going to save the file with the same name. You can rename it if you want, but we're going to keep it the same name. Under variables, we're going to create some variables. So let's hit add. We will say API, and our value for this pipeline is going to be our API URL. So we copy that again to the clipboard, make sure we have it, and we paste it here. I've left it unlocked for now because I want you to see that's what we're pasting in for our value for our API. We can hit lock now if you want to make that safe and secure, and it'll be just dots. But since it's unlocked, that's fine because it's not a secret. It's just that it's something we want to do in production or in the build process for deploying this, in this case, to a development deploy. So we're going to hit save on this again. So now it's saved with the new value. Notice it moved up the top, API, and our URL. Now, this build process right here, this replace tokens, it's going to look for our JSON file. Let's go over our JSON file, in this case, appsettings.json. And it's going to look for that pound sign, open curly brace, close curly brace, and pound sign again. And inside is the variable name, in this case, API. So it's going to find these tags and go, oh, you know what? That's a token. So I'm going to replace this whole thing with whatever I find in that variable in the pipeline. So it's going to find the API variable and go, cool, I'm going to put the API URL here. That will put in appsettings.json. Now you may say, well, what about production.json? Well, we're actually not saving, we're not extracting the production.json file. So therefore, we're not going to have that override. And it's also right now blank. We can come back to it in the future and think if we want to remove that or not, since we're doing it this way. But I think I want to save it for now. I have some ideas where that might still be useful. So now with all of this being done, I think we're actually about done with our modifications. Not really massive ones. As you can see, if we go to our changes, we have two changes, one to our CS_proj file and one to our JSON file. Let's click on both of those, right click and say stage. Now those files are staged, which means they're prepared to be a commit. We give a message. So update app settings.json with token. Adds a token to the main JSON file so that it can be updated during build. There we go. And we can commit and staged, or commit the staged thing. Go to sync. We do a fetch first to make sure there's nothing on the server. If there was, it'd pop up here, and we can say, oh, we want to merge these changes in before we do a push. But since there is nothing to merge in, we can go ahead and do a push. Now, we have a CI/CD process, meaning continuous integration, continuous deployment. So now you've pushed something. We go back to pipelines. Notice we have the queued indicator here on our pipeline. If we click on it, we'll see we have a new build that's kicking off. We click on this build. We can come in here and look at the agent. We can see what's going on for this agent. This will take a few minutes because of the fact that I don't have a dedicated build server. And this came up actually, I'm doing some work with a developer right now, and that's one of the questions that came up was, well, man, our build process is like 5 minutes long. And that was concerning. And I'm not concerned at all because of the fact that, yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff and we don't control the build server. The build server is provided by Microsoft for free, and it's for development purposes. It's designed to get you off the ground, get you started, but it's not designed to be what you use in production, in real life. If you want to have a more performant build process, which at some point you definitely will, even in development, because of the fact that this takes some time. In that case, what you want to do is create your own private build server that you then host the agent and point your pipeline at. That sounds complicated, but in reality, Microsoft has a really good document on docs.microsoft.com that walks you through the few steps necessary to install this on any machine. What I did for one company I worked for was I created a virtual machine in Azure. Since we had free Azure credits, I said, hey, we're not using all of them. Let's create a very cheap virtual machine that we host the build agent on. That's all we did. We created a virtual machine, hosted the build agent there, used those few steps to deploy it, and it dramatically increased our speed of build and deploy. So that's how to think about. If you have a server at work and you're doing this for work, then hosting it locally internally can be a great thing. It can be a speed increase and in some cases even a security increase. I'm going to pause this video. I don't want to spend all this time just talking, but I do want to kind of go over that because that has been a question that's come up. Our token is just replaced. Because, speed's important. And sometimes that's a question that comes up, especially when I use the API and that's slow to start, or the build process is slow to run, those kind of things. It's not necessarily because it's a slow process, but because we're using all the free stuff. And if you expect your free stuff to be rocket fast, you probably aren't going to get it. You're probably disappointed. Be thankful you're getting free stuff. I'm very, very thankful that Microsoft has provided so much of this stuff for free. This stuff used to be expensive to do, and it was only for companies, and now we can do it for free. All right, so I'll go ahead and pause the video here, wait for this to complete. All right, looks like we're done, and it looks like it was successful. Let's go back to our job and notice we have in this update appsettings.json with token, we have 5 published files or 5 published things, artifacts. And one of them is our WPF drop. So let's open this up. And now we have appsettings.json and our exe. So let's grab this whole file and download the artifacts. And once this downloads, what I'll do is I will extract it over to our demos folder, and because it's coming down as a zip file. And then we'll look at what this actually looks like. So grab the files and I move them over. There we go. We don't need the PDB file. The PDB file is for debugging. We can get rid of that for now. Let's look at, first of all, let's unlock this exe. Let's go to properties, unblock, apply. And I don't think this has the, oh, it does. Let's unblock that file as well. If you don't unblock them by yourself, what's going to happen is probably your antivirus is going to pick up on that and go, hey, is this file okay? And it's going to really try hard to make you say no. And you have to kind of, click a learn more button or something like that. And then it's going to say, okay, fine, we'll let you run it. So just note that. Let's look at the JSON file. Let's edit this. And notice the JSON file now says the tax rate, or I'm sorry, the API is timcoapi.azureswebsites.net. That's our public API. And it did that because it replaced the token. So now if we run this exe file, let's run this. Let's wait for it to open up. There we go. Let's change this to be the right password. Let's hit login. And there we go. We're logging in right away to our API. So you succeeded in changing the token, or changing the app setting to have a token, replacing that token. We've also changed it so that it excludes that appsettings.json file from the exe. We've also made sure that it's building in release mode. So all those things are happening, and we now have an exe we can hand out. It's 2 files. It's our executable and our settings file, but that's okay. Now, one of the questions that's going to come up is, well, what if we have a connection string? Where are we going to put that? And this is the very reason we're using an API for our WPF project. It may feel like added complexity without added benefit, but there is a huge added benefit. And that is that you don't see anywhere in this file anything truly sensitive. You see just a URL. And if they want to change that, they could do it. Now the tax rate, you may say, well, that shouldn't be there. And we do want to move that into the database at some point. But honestly, it wouldn't actually hurt anything. Because if they change this to say just 0.75, that's what it'd show on the client side. But when we went to actually do the purchase, it would bill them correctly at the 8.75 rate. So just note that we still have that server side that's doing the actual work with that. So even that wouldn't be a problem. But if we had a connection string here, this would show the username and password to our database. There is not a way around this that's truly viable. I have a whole video on this, and if you want to go watch that video, that's great. You'll get a lot more information about this. It's in my dev question series that talks about connection strings. And basically the point it comes down to is with a desktop application, you're controlling one end of the connection. So it does not matter if we have an encrypted string here, because we don't use that encrypted string to talk to SQL. We would decrypt it in our C# application and then transmit the clear text password. Now we do so over HTTPS, but since we own this half the connection, then a person could still get those credentials quite easily on this machine. The only thing that HTTPS protects against is that transmission in the middle. So if I was listening on another machine, I would not get the credentials. But since I own one end of the connection, I would have those credentials. That's why I really encourage you, if you have any kind of sensitive connection string, if you can, use an API. Because notice, it's just the API. There's no login name and password. There's no tokens, nothing like that. It's just the API. And then you log in and your credentials are transmitted safely and securely. And even if though you have access to your credentials, you had to log in, so you have them yourself. So that's the best way if you can. If you can't get around it, then you need to make sure that your connection string limits that login name and password to be a limited user that has very little access, just the access that the user would have with the application, no more. Typically, people put in a administrative login name and password because it's easiest. Don't do that. That allows people to drop tables. It allows people to get beyond the scope of what your application normally would do. So just want to point that out there. All right, so we got that done, and we're most of the way done what we wanted to accomplish in this video. But I do want to point out a couple more things, and we'll also deal with that Git issue. So first of all, we should have a deployment, but I think it did not deploy. And I think the reason why is because continuous deployment is turned off. So let's turn continuous deployment on, and let's say that we're going to add a branch filter, include, and let's grab the master branch only, and we'll say that we're going to build off the master branch. So now we've got our continuous deployment turned back on. We didn't have it turned on for a minute. So we're going to deploy our API to Linux, and then also we're going to deploy our databases and do an Azure blob copy of our zip file, and that goes over to Azure Blob Storage. So that's what's happening. Let's create the release manually this time because we didn't trigger it automatically, and we'll let that run. In the meantime, if we go back to repos and look at our files, there's a couple of files that I don't really want to have in my repository. First of all, appsettings.development.json in the API. And then also in the UI project, we also have that development.json file. I really don't want to have, well, at least the API. The desktop UI, I'm not overly concerned about because of the fact that there's going to be nothing sacred, nothing secure that goes into that file because the user gets it. I'm not concerned about having that one. But I am concerned about the API because I want to have stuff that's for the local user. I want the local user to be able to change things and say, hey, no, this is the setting for that. So therefore, I really want to have at least this file removed from Git. Now, this is one that's going to come up. You're going to have files that you're like, oh, I should have removed that from Git. Now what do I do? We're going to talk through your different options because ideally, you never want to commit something to Git that is in any way sensitive. And we haven't yet. There's nothing in development at all that's sensitive. But if we had a password in here, that'd be an issue because not only is it in the file, even if we change the file, I can go to history and look at the previous versions of that file. So even if I remove it from the latest version, it's still in the history. So you have to rewrite history, and that's not ideal. But in my case, I just want to get rid of this file and say, you know what, don't track this file and don't have it in Git. So that'll require a couple of changes. Let's go to Visual Studio again. And still under my Team Explorer, I want to go to settings. Go to repository settings, I believe. Yep, that's the one. And under repository settings, we have the ignore file. It says /gitignore. We can hit edit. We click edit. This is our git ignore file. You can also find this by going to your solution, right-clicking and saying open folder in File Explorer. And in here is a git ignore file. Now, if you don't see that file, you may have to change the view settings on your File Explorer to show hidden items. So just note that that's one. I believe some setting, I'm not sure if it's hidden items or something, another setting that hides files that start with a dot. So just note that that's, make sure that it's not being hidden. I don't think it will be, but just in case. I know that the .git and .vs folders are hidden otherwise. But if we open this git ignore file up, we already did that in Visual Studio. If we do a Control F, we can look for any cases of a JSON file. Let's just look in just the current document. So you have our project.lock.json, our project.fragment, launch settings.json, and I believe that's all of the JSON. It is. That's all the JSON entries. So let's create a new entry for our JSON files, and let's just say API developer JSON files or file, like so. And in here, we could just use the star syntax, so star dot, and then say star dots, or even say appsetting.development.json. The problem is if we do that, it's also going to exclude this other one. If we don't want that to happen, we need to have just this one be excluded. We have to give it the full path. I believe the full path here is trm API / appsettings.development.json. So that's, I believe that's the path, this file. We're going to find out for sure in just a minute. So that's our new git ignore file. We added lines 15 and 16. Line 15, this is a comment. So anything that starts with the hashtag or the pound sign, depending on which generation you're from. This is a pound sign, this first character, but newer generation, hashtag. So anything that starts with that is going to be a comment. So notice that some of these even will have, for example, www root. That would be an actual entry, except for the fact we have, again, that character in front of it, meaning it's a comment. And it says, uncomment if you have tasks to create the project static files in www root. So therefore, we'd uncomment that in certain circumstances. Most cases, we would not, because we're not creating the file, the project static files in the www root file folder. We have those there already. So, but in our case, that's the file we want to exclude from or ignore from Git. But we're not quite done yet. First of all, let's go ahead and go to changes, and we'll commit this. Let's first check our build process to see if our release is done. And it is. It's complete. It's published. We're good to go. So now we can come back over here and let's commit this. We're going to say ignore development JSON file in API. And we don't even need to have a message for that. That's, the title's good enough. We're going to commit, let's just stage this. We're going to commit just this file, but I'm not going to sync it quite yet. So what should happen is it should ignore now this file, but it still says checked in. So let's right click on our solution and open folder in File Explorer. We're going to right click here and say git bash here. If you don't have this, you can also type cmd in this bar and it will open up a command prompt in this folder. I prefer git bash. It's got a little bit nicer feel. You can also use the Windows terminal and go to the right path. It's up to you. So PowerShell, whatever. So I can do a git status to see what our status is. We're on the master branch. We're ahead of origin master by one commit, meaning we've done one more commit locally than we have on the server or the origin location. But I want to remove that file from being tracked. Because right now, if I make any change, it's still being tracked. So what we're going to do is run a removal command. And that command is git space rm -- cached. What this will do is it will remove the file from being tracked, but it will keep the file locally. So rm removes it from being tracked, and then if we don't have -- cached, then it will also remove it locally from our directory. It'll delete the file. We don't want that. We want to keep it on our local disk. We don't want it to be tracked. We don't want it to be in Git. We're going to remove it from Git, the index. So git rm -- cached, and then we have our path, which is trm API / appsettings.development.json. And we hit enter, and now it's removed that file from being tracked, but it is still local. And if we look now, it can be hard to see, but let's see if we can zoom in here. Notice under appsettings.json has that blue lock, but appsettings.development.json has the red X, meaning it's not being tracked. That's actually what we want. And now we have that done. We can come back over here to our sync and first do our fetch. Shouldn't be anything there. And now I can push these changes, which also the get ignored changes. What that does is it makes sure that going forward, we won't be tracking that file. If somebody else were to download our repository, they won't see the tracked file. If they add an appsettings.development.json manually, it won't be tracked. So there's a couple different parts to this. You have to do all the different parts, otherwise it seems like nothing works. So that's how we remove a file from being tracked. Now if we go over to our repository, we go to files under the API, we'll notice that it shouldn't be, and it actually is still here. Awesome. Oh, you know what? I think I know what the problem is. If we go back over to Visual Studio, go over to synchronization, go to changes, notice stage changes. There's one stage change, removing the file. Remove development settings file. Let's commit that, and we'll go ahead and hit sync. I'll just go ahead and hit push because I just did the previous one. I could have done a merge commit, which would be to, or not a merge commit. I could have merged the two commits. There's a difference there, not a merge commit. I could have taken those two commits and basically made them into one and kind of fixed the other commit, but this is fine to have two commits. I think that's okay. If we go back over here now and we hit refresh on this API, notice that file went away. Now, if we go back and look at our Solution Explorer, we'll still see that file. It's still there, but it's no longer on the server. It's no longer part of the package, the files that we're going to be getting if we do a git pull on our code. We're not going to have that file so that you can create yourself locally if you want to override some settings. With that, we're done this episode of a TimCo Retail Manager. If you liked it, I'd love if you get a thumbs up. I'd love if you'd share it if that sounds appropriate to you. But in any ways, thank you for watching. Thank you for kind of walking through this process and kind of continue with this process as we build this application like we're doing it in the real world. All right, my name is Tim Corey, and thanks for watching.